بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Usman Mughni. I am a licensed therapist and the primary therapist and founder of a clinic in Dallas, Texas, Peaceful You Counseling and Therapy Services. I am here today speaking to Continuous Charity on a topic which I feel is often overlooked but has been the focus of a lot of medical research, and I believe should be the focus of our Islamic communities. And that topic is stress and stress management, right? So today we're going to be talking about what stress is, how to identify when stress is actually becoming a health risk for us, and really what to do about it. So those are just some of the basic goals. So Bismillah, let's start off with just some basic definitions, right? So stress has multiple definitions, but the definition which I seem to like the most is that stress is a condition, physical and emotional condition, in which your mind and your body start to feel that the challenges ahead of you are way, way, way more than the actual resources that you have. So for example, I have a final coming up tomorrow, and I have to study 20 chapters, but I only have 5 hours to study for it. So the allotted time that I have, the resource that I have, are not enough to actually handle the challenge ahead of me. So this is where stress kicks in, right? Another definition along with stress that we're going to discuss is something known as eustress. It's spelled E-U and then stress. Eustress is something which is stress that actually motivates us, that encourages us to work harder or work faster or work more efficiently. It shouldn't be confused with procrastinating and then working hard at the last minute. But eustress is something which we can think of as kind of a positive stress. And then the final thing that we're going to talk about is something known as vicarious trauma. That's just a fancy word for continuous stress which happens to us on a constant basis, day in and day out, day in and day out. And this type of stress is something which causes the most physical damage to the body. So why is this important? Why is this topic important? Number one, stress drastically increases the chance of physical illnesses. Okay, heart disease, diabetes, obesity. On top of that, if you already are sick, stress will make you sicker, right? So it can cause sickness and it can exacerbate sickness. So that's from a medical standpoint. From a psychological standpoint, when somebody feels stressed, their memory starts to get impaired. They start to become more irritable. And sometimes it reaches a point where you become a person that you just normally aren't. You start to find yourself yelling at your loved ones, or shutting down, or isolating, and just becoming somebody that you don't want to be, right? Stress also lowers your life expectancy, right? So I am a bit of a science nerd, so I already apologize in advance for some of the science terms that I'm going to be throwing out, but I believe that science is a tool that we can use to appreciate the magnificent creation of Allah Azza wa Jal. So when we talk about the brain and stress and so on, and I'm going to share with you a few wonderful systems that Allah Azza wa Jalla has naturally put in place to help us cope with stress. This is just so that we appreciate our creation and we appreciate our Creator more. So everybody's familiar with DNA, right? There is a structure on each strand of DNA known as telomeres. Telomeres are basically, you can call them like the end caps or protective caps of DNA strands. Stress actually starts to deteriorate this. And what that means is that you will die earlier. So the reason that I'm pointing some of these physical things out is because sometimes as a society, we tend to have this perception that stress is just, oh, you're just kind of bugged out right now, you're just stressed out, get over it, right? But what we're learning now in neuroscience is that these are actual tangible physical things. One study showed that stress accounted for, I don't know, a few $1 billion in healthcare costs, which could have been saved just by basic stress management. So this is a real thing. This is very tangible. It's not just something made up. So that's the reason that I'm so much emphasizing the science behind it, right? Now, not only that, stress can also be carried in our genes to our next generation. So not only do we suffer, but our progeny will suffer as well. So there was a historical event towards the end of World War II, as Nazi Germany was collapsing and the Nazis were retreating. They went through the southern portion of the Netherlands, and as one of their kind of last goes at evilness, they decided to block out all of the food entering into the southern region of the Netherlands. This event became known as the Dutch winter hunger, right? And so you had an entire population of people completely cut off from food to the point that they were eating garbage. And what researchers found is that the stress that they went through, and this would be an example of vicarious trauma, because every day they wake up not knowing where their next meal is going to come from, right? What researchers found is that this stress gene was carried onto their children and their grandchildren. So now we have people today who are the grandchildren and sometimes the great-grandchildren of people which survived the Dutch winter or were part of the Dutch winter hunger. And they have the same illnesses. They have the same propensity to fall ill, to go through psychological and physical ailments just because their grandparents went through it. So it has a very, very long-lasting effect. So hopefully that's enough to scare you guys into realizing that this is really a health crisis, right? So it is definitely worthwhile to discuss and take seriously. Stress, as sinister of a thing as it is, it's part of our natural disposition. And one of the things that I've often wondered is that if it's a part of our natural disposition, and it has such severe consequences, where is the balance? Because Allah Azza wa Jal is the most merciful, right? But yet I'm telling you, it's natural to become stressed. Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا, that insan was created in a state of haste, of worry, of always thinking what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. This is our natural disposition. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, that Allah has created man in a state of weakness. So human beings, and this is something that I find in my line of work a lot, is that human beings, it's very paradoxical. We have the most fragile psyche. Sometimes some of us, events can completely break us. Sometimes they can cause severe changes in the brain. And yet we're also one of the most resilient beings that Allah Azza wa Jalla has created. Right? While Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, that man was created weak, Allah Azza wa Jalla, at the same token, He also says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we have exalted human beings and we have perfected their creation. So there is that balance. As evil of a thing as stress is, we also know that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us this balance. The Prophet ﷺ has taught us that مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ دَاءٍ إِلَّا أَنزَلَ لَهُ شِفَاءً, that Allah Azza wa Jal has not created any disease except that there is a cure for it as well. Right? لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٍ, that for every disease there is a cure. And Allah Azza wa Jal tells us in different places in the Quran, إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that with every difficulty comes ease. So while we talk about stress and what it does to the body, we're going to see that simultaneously Allah Azza wa Jal has created a system which there's ease which comes along with that stress. And we're going to talk about that in a very interesting way. We're going to talk about that from a biological and a spiritual and a social perspective. So when it comes to addressing a topic like stress, and I also talk about things like anxiety, depression, any physical or mental ailment that human beings might be prone to, the best way to talk about it is through a model known as the biopsychosocial spiritual model. Right? It's a very holistic way of looking at these problems. I'll repeat that again. It's called the biopsychosocial spiritual model. Right? So bio, the first part, indicates that there is a biological component to stress. So what's the biology behind stress, right? Anthropologists talk about this idea that Allah Azza wa Jal, they don't say Allah Azza wa Jal, but we know that Allah Azza wa Jal has placed in us this mechanism, the stress response, which was originally there as a survival mechanism, right? So if you imagine a long time ago, our ancestors going out for food, right? Hunters and gatherers, they're going out to get food. You had to, as a means of survival, assume the absolute worst. You had to be stressed out a little bit. If you see a plant which is unknown, you don't just, okay, look, let me just have positive thinking and eat it. It could be poisonous. If you see a saber-toothed tiger, you don't pet it because it's going to bite your head off, right? So we had this instinct of assuming the worst, of thinking negatively, of being stressed out as a means of survival. What happened is that we never learned to shut that off. And so what research shows us now is that the same stress response that kicks into our bodies when we're being chased by a wild animal or we're being chased by somebody with a gun, the same thing happens to our bodies when we are worried about an exam, when we are worried about finances, when we don't know how to pay for college, when we don't, we're not getting along with our spouse or our child is sick. Our body doesn't know how to tell the difference. Immediately, the stress response kicks in, right? And so cortisol floods the body, the hypothalamus, an area in the brain signals, okay, warning, warning, we need to release adrenaline, we need to release cortisol, we need to release sugar into the body. And because you have to survive. And this is why people with prolonged stress are more prone to gaining weight and more prone to diseases, because the body's being flooded with sugar. But it's also very interesting. We found that as you are running away from somebody with a knife, right, or somebody with a gun, you're not thinking about reproducing. So your reproductive system shuts down. You're not thinking about fighting a cold, so your immune system shuts down, right? And so this is why a while ago when I was defending my thesis, I remember I was getting an average of maybe 2 hours of sleep. So not the best example of stress management. I've learned since then. But I was working at 2 different hospitals. I was driving pretty much 150 miles a day at times. I remember one of my professors and mentors, she told me, she said, Usman, by the time you're finished defending your thesis and when all of this is done, you're going to get sick. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? How do you know? I feel just fine. She's like, no, trust me, you're going to get a cold. And lo and behold, after everything was done, I ended up getting sick. I got a fever and I got a runny nose and I got a sore throat. What was happening was that my body had decided that I do not need to activate my immune system, because my body was thinking, okay, being stressed out about your thesis is the same thing as being, chased by somebody with a knife. So therefore, we don't need to worry about fighting a cold. All we need to do is learn to survive, right? We need to store energy. How's energy stored? As fat. And so that's why people which are stressed out enough, it's interesting, the body gathers fat specifically in the trunk, right? This midsection area. So this is why a lot of us stressed out daisies don't have 6 packs, right? So that's what the brain is telling the body, right? So where is the ease in this, right? Inna ma'al usri yusra. Where is the ease in this? Because what I'm saying is that we are predispositioned to stress, but then stress is this just horrible, sinister, insidious thing which is going to kill us. So where's the ease in all of this? So it's very interesting, subhanAllah, we found that very recently, now we're still talking about the biological part of this, right? We found that very recently that, yes, the body releases these stress hormones, but at the same time, it releases a very interesting hormone. Right? It's a hormone that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's gained quite a bit of popularity in the last decade or so, oxytocin. And it's the weirdest hormone to be released at a time of stress. Oxytocin is actually the hormone which is released when a woman is giving childbirth. Oxytocin is the hormone which is released when you hug your mother. Oxytocin is the hormone which is released when you feel love and when you feel tenderness, when you feel care. It's actually called the love hormone, or the cuddle hormone, believe it or not, right? So in that, Allah Azza wa Jal is creating this equilibrium of, while I'm hammering your body with these stress hormones, I'm also giving you the cure at the same time. Now it's your choice as to which hormone to grab onto. It's your choice as to what to hold on to. And so we found that we've all met people which, you look at them like, subhanAllah, they went through so much, and how are they so calm? How are they so patient, right? They've trained their bodies to deal with stress. There are some people which are just better at dealing with stress than others, right? And from a biological standpoint, we can simplify it to, these are the people which are able to grasp onto the oxytocin more than they can grasp onto the cortisol and the adrenaline and some of the negative hormones, right? So let's talk about, from a biological standpoint, then what are some of the tips and tools, like what can we learn from this in dealing with stress from the biological standpoint? Okay, number one is we want to make sure that the stress doesn't get to a point where it reaches the state of vicarious trauma, because that's where some things might have, it may be very difficult to reverse, right? So pay attention, tip number one, pay attention to physical symptoms, right? If you're noticing changes in your sleep, in your eating, in weight gain, impaired memory, sometimes stomach pain, sometimes even diarrhea, nausea, these type of things, these can all be indications of stress. In fact, a while ago, we used to think that stomach ulcers were a result of stress. That's actually not true. What actually happens is that bacteria thrive on somebody which isn't managing stress properly. So people with stress have less chance of fighting off bacteria, so then they have more chance of developing GI problems like stomach ulcers. So pay attention to your body, right? What that means is that no matter where you are in life, right, whether it's a new job, a new move, starting a new university, finals, have some constants in your life, including paying attention to diet, paying attention to exercise, reducing the amount of sugar, especially at moments when everybody knows what stress eating is, right? So one of the reasons stress eating is so damaging is that your body's already flooding with sugar. So the last thing you want to do is eat more sugar on top of that. So this is the time when you want to be hyper vigilant about diet and exercise. The second thing is, from a biological standpoint, how do we get our bodies to release more oxytocin, right? This is through reaching out to loved ones, asking for help, not being shy to hug your mom from time to time, dude, right? So having the having the ability to try and take steps to strengthen your family bonds, right? You might be wondering, what does this have to do with me preparing for a final exam? Well, it has a lot to do with you preparing for a final exam, because as the body releases oxytocin, you're not going to get the negative responses of stress. And then the final biological tip is get your body to release dopamine. So dopamine is this wonderful neurotransmitter which is found is the root of a lot of antidepressants, right? Our brains have this ability to really cheer us up, right? Our brains can be our best friend or our worst nightmare. And so how we get the body to release dopamine is by exercising, by engaging in self-care, and also trying to pay attention to the good in our life, right? Trying to pay attention to that yusr while we're facing or might be going through that difficulty, right? What we found is that people, when the brain floods the body with dopamine, not only are we happier, but dopamine has another function. It's a very interesting function. It simultaneously turns on all the learning centers of your brain, right? So this is why, if you might notice that there are moments, let's say, for example, that you're trying to memorize Quran and you're stressed out, you might get like a few ayat in. But then when you're feeling really good, all of a sudden by magic, you're able to like knock out a page, right? That's science. That's Allah Azza wa Jal giving you that mercy of releasing that dopamine to your body. And so from a biological standpoint, as we're paying attention to physical symptoms, people which are working on like work projects, or learn to take breaks, learn to incorporate exercise so that you're focusing on quality over quantity, and you're making sure that your body is releasing enough of that oxytocin and your body is releasing enough of that dopamine. Okay, let's move on to psychologically, right? So we said biopsychosocial, spiritual. So psychologically, understand that Allah Azza wa Jal has created our mind in a way which we can create scenarios, right? We did a test where we hooked up we hooked up Olympic athletes to a functional MRI machine, and we had them visualize and really, really think about the routine that they're doing. So an Olympic level swimmer would just really focus on swimming, or Olympic weightlifter would focus on the muscles used to weightlift. What started to happen was the actual muscles which are used in that exercise began to fire, as if the body was confused and thinking, oh my God, I'm actually going through this exercise right now, right? So our bodies have this ability our brains have this ability to create the world around us, right? Research shows that if you know everything about somebody, you know how much money they make, what type of house they live in, what type of neighborhood they live in, whether they get along with their family or not, what type of car they drive, what their education level is, what type of food they ate this morning, you can only predict 10% of their happiness. 90+% is on the way they perceive the world around them, right? And so from a psychological standpoint, what I advise people is to start learning to see the khair around them, right? The people of Shu'aib alayhi salam, they practice shukr. And so one of the activities that one of the homework assignments that I give some of my patients is that I have them go home and every night write down maybe 2 or 3 things that they are grateful for, something unique every day. You do that for 21 days, and science shows that you start to notice that khair around you. You start to become that optimistic person. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an optimistic prophet. And he was able to see the good even in the most difficult situations, right? So we see in the Battle of Khandaq, we see that the Prophet ﷺ, as he's digging the trench to protect the city of Medina, he's talking about the victories in Rome and Persia, saying that I see the jewels and the treasures of the kings of Rome and Persia. This is at a time when in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah talks about the emotional state of the believers as if the hearts were out of fear reaching their throats. And here the Prophet ﷺ is talking about victories. And so this is the example of Rasul ﷺ, who was very psychologically strong and was able to be optimistic at the most difficult times. So we want to train ourselves to do that. Okay. Along with the psychological care is I advise people to have 2 forms of self-care, right? And look at self-care as not a luxury or if I have time, but an absolute necessity. Just like I have breakfast every morning, just like I have to pray, I have to engage in some form of self-care. So I break that down into 2 different things. One is a constant self-care, right? So that might be daily exercise, that might be something as even like I'm going to watch funny YouTube videos for like 15 minutes every day. It might be just meditating, it might be mindfulness meditation, it might be just going for a walk. But it's something consistent. No matter what you do, no matter what goes on in your life, whether you're on vacation, whether you have a lot of family over, you're not going to miss that constant. So that brings some type of balance into your life. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, if any of you are familiar with Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he was a scholar which went through a lot of stressful situations, including living in a time when the Mongolians had really ransacked a lot of the Muslim Ummah. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he had a constant. And his constant was that after Fajr, every single morning without fail, he would sit and he would remember Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And one of my sheikhs told me that sometimes he would just recite Surah Al-Fatiha and reflect on that. But he made that a priority. He made that a constant. One of the students asked him, like, Ya Sheikh, why do you do this every day? He said, Hada ghadi, this is my breakfast. If I don't have this breakfast every day, I can't go on for the rest of the day. So have something which is constant irrespective of what's going on in your day, right? And then set aside something for emergencies, right? Have a kind of an emergency action plan. When I start to notice physical symptoms, when I start to notice that, okay, I'm heading down the road of stress, this is my emergency plan. I have to maybe lighten my workload as much as I can, right? Tell those around me, hey, listen, I'm going through a little bit of a tough time, so I might need to reach out to you for support from time to time. Be vocal about that. Go through steps of, if you like walking every day, we'll make it a plan like that weekend to go for a long hike, right? So just to share what I do, because psychologists are prone to vicarious trauma through transference. What that means is that we deal sometimes on a day-to-day basis with some very, very serious problems, and sometimes we see the most challenging aspects of our communities. And so we're taught to engage in the self-care. That's part of our training in grad school. And so for me, I try and make it a daily routine to work out. I try and make it a daily routine to sometimes practice what's known as mindfulness meditation, which is, simply trying to clear your mind, go out for a walk, and just absorb the environment around you. And then every few months, I'm a national park junkie. So every few months, I'll try and go to a national park just to recharge my battery. But I don't see this as something which, if I have time, it's optional. No, I see this as something which I have to do in order to be a better father, in order to be a better husband, in order to be a better son, in order to be a better Muslim overall. And so I have changed my mindset to look at self-care as a necessity rather than a luxury. Let's talk about now the social aspect, right? You want to be around people who are positive and encourage that level of self-care, right? If you find yourself as the therapist of the group, right, or the family therapist of the family, learn to take a break once in a while. Learn to be around people which also care for you, so it's reciprocal, right? Reach out when you need help and don't isolate, right? And so one of the things which really stood out to me from the Quran is this. SubhanAllah, we know that Allah Azza wa Jal tests those that He loves, and that means that the Anbiya were tested the most. They went through the most stressful situations, right? So Surah Al-Anbiya, it talks about some of the stresses that the prophets went through, right? And so Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about, I'll talk about two different prophets towards the end, right? Allah Azza wa Jal talks about Ayyub alayhi salam. Ayyub alayhi salam, his test was that he went through a lot of physical elements, right? He had something that was vitiligo, and then just a bunch of different physical elements, right? So Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرَّ وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. That when Ayyub cried out to his Lord, "Oh my Lord, I've been afflicted with this distress, with this pain, with this affliction. وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. That you are the most merciful." This is idafa, right? Arham al-Rahimin. So Allah says that, Ayub says that, "Oh Allah, you are the only one fully capable of removing my pain, and your mercy is limitless." This is what the meaning of Arham al-Rahimin is, right? And then later, Allah Azza wa Jal speaks of the dua of Ayub alayhi salam, right? And Ayub alayhi salam, he says, وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ Yunus alayhi salam, I apologize. When Yunus alayhi salam, when Allah Azza wa Jal says that he فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَامِ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That, and remember the companion of the whale, Yunus alayhi salam, when he was swallowed by the whale and he went down to the depths of the ocean. So you can't be more isolated than that. And he calls out in the darkness, right? And this darkness can be, of course, in Yunus alayhi salam, it was a physical darkness, but we all go through some level of darkness in our life, right? So he calls out Allah Azza wa Jal in the darkest of darkness, in the depth of the ocean, right? Subhanaka la ilaha illa anta inni kuntu min al-zalimin. That there is no Lord except you. I was among the zalimin. And Allah Azza wa Jal says, I immediately respond to it. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَامِ. We immediately respond to him, and we saved him from what? We saved him from gham. We saved him from sadness. We saved him from grief, right? Now, what's interesting here is that these are individual dua of the prophets when they went through that hardship. Now, what I found extremely interesting is that at the end of this chain of verses of these individual struggles that the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam went through, Allah Azza wa Jal says, "Inna hadihi ummatukum ummatan wahida." Allah Azza wa Jal then talks about this idea of you're not alone even as a community. Inna hadihi ummatukum ummatan wahida wa ana rabbukum fa'budun. That, and this nation of yours is one nation, and I am your Lord, so worship me. What this shows us that even the Anbiya, when they handled stress, they did not isolate. They did not isolate from Allah Azza wa Jal, and they did not isolate from their community. They did not isolate from Allah Azza wa Jal, and they did not isolate from their community. We have a plethora of dua also dealing with how to deal with stress. And dua, we want to use this as one tool among many tools, right? This is, I believe, the right approach, right? So this is the spiritual, right? Remember, we addressed the biological, psychological, social. Now we're talking about the spiritual. And one of my favorite dua is when Allah Azza wa Jalla, the Prophet taught us that when any of you is going through that hardship, that sadness, that grief, that stress, you say, Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta taj'alul hazana idha shi'ta sahla. That, oh Allah, there is no difficulty except that you there is no ease except what you make easy. وَأَنْتَ تَجْعَلُ الْحَزْنَ إِذَا شِئْتَ سَهْلًا. And you can make even sadness easy. One of the reasons I, as a therapist, actually like this dua is because it implies something. What it implies is that huzn, sadness, is a big deal, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us in this dua. It's as if you're saying that, oh Allah, you can make climbing a mountain, even you can make even climbing a mountain easy, right? And you can make even climbing Everest. So he gives a more extreme example, easy. So the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us here that sadness is a form of difficulty. Sadness is an extreme form of difficulty. It's a real thing. So that's one of the reasons that I like this dua, is because it shows our Prophet ﷺ's understanding of human emotions, right? So this is just one of the many dua that we can incorporate. And I ask people, I ask my Muslim patients at least, to learn to develop a special relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, where they are able to remember all of the times that Allah Azza wa Jal has saved them. I think we all have experiences in our life where we thought, you know what, I have no clue how I'm going to get out of this. And somehow, miraculously, Allah Azza wa Jal saves us, right? To remember that relationship, remember who took care of you during that time. And so that during time of difficulty, during time of stress, we're able to recall those incidences to the point where we see a pattern and we say, you know what, my Lord won't abandon me. My Lord won't abandon me. So these are just some of the basic steps to dealing with stress through that model that I discussed, the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual model of handling stress. Final, I guess, video recommendation that I recommend is there's a documentary called Stress: Portrait of a Killer, and that's on YouTube and Netflix as well. It's an old documentary, but it really hits home the point about self-care and the science of stress, and it's very interesting, especially for any science nerds out there like myself. I think it'd be very beneficial. So with that, inshallah, I guess we have a few minutes for question and answer. You can type it in the chat box. I just read it? Do I read it or do I?
You can read it.
Okay. All right. What about depression or anxiety? There is dua to ask for protection from this, but shouldn't people with severe depression get medicine and not just make dua? Okay, excellent point. And I actually just forgot one part that I wanted to mention. So how do you know when to get help, right? So there are two things. Number one, there's a misconception of therapy that you have to be in crisis in order to get therapy. I have to wait until things get to the absolute worst, right? Statistics show that people don't come into therapy, like for example, for marriage therapy, until 5 to 7 years after a problem in their marriage. Then that's when they come to therapy, right? Why can't it be preventative medicine? Why can't we approach therapy that, look, I know there's going to be a large stressor in my life, And so therefore, before I actually start to get the physical symptoms of it, before I start to suffer through it, let me meet with a therapist, work on an individual plan so that I can better deal with it before the calamity actually hits, right? But should you already be going through that stress, the simple rule of thumb is that when your day-to-day function is starting to be affected, your relationship with Allah is affected, your relationship with your family is affected, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping right, you're not able to focus correctly, that is a huge warning sign that you need to get help. Therapy is going to help you better understand yourself, and we work on tailoring a specific solution for you, right? The easiest way, if I can just throw in a quick advertisement, to get hold of us is just through our website, www.peacefulYOU.org. And we offer therapy via Skype as well as in person at our office in Dallas. It's a very simple system. You just go on the website, you just schedule yourself, right? So real quickly, let's go back to that question. What about depression and anxiety? There is dua to ask for protection from this, but shouldn't people with severe depression get medicine and not just make dua? Absolutely, 100 million% correct, right? Depression and anxiety are actual medical diseases, right? A lot of people don't know this, but right now, we have a huge stigma, especially within the Muslim community, against getting help and seeking therapy and mental illness, to a point where a lot of people erroneously will say things like, well, if you just had more iman, if you just prayed more, you wouldn't be depressed. No, there's a biology behind depression. Would you say the same thing for somebody who was going through, let's say, cancer or diabetes, right? Well, if you just make dua and eat some honey and eat some haldi or something, that your diabetes is going to be cured? Of course not. Yes, you make dua, but you exercise. You see a doctor. You take metformin. You do what you need to do. It's a holistic approach, right? Same thing with depression. Yes, you make dua, but that's just one of many different tools. You see a therapist. If medication is needed, then you get medication. You exercise. You reach out to your support system. You engage in something known as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the most widely used forms of therapy to combat depression. So dua is just one of many tools. And it's sad that we have become an ummah which kind of brushes mental illness to the side when a lot of people don't know this, but the year 80 Hijri was when the first mental health hospital, this first psychiatric hospital was made. That was in Baghdad, 80 Hijri. So we're looking at some of the Tabi'in and Zama Tabi'in actually living at that time when we had our first psychiatric hospital, where Muslims believed that people suffering through mental illnesses deserve to live a dignified life. Okay? Year 200 Hijri approximately, we had the first book on cognitive behavioral therapy by a Muslim scientist named Al-Balkhi. He wrote a book called Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus, handling the affairs of the body and the mind, right? And so this was our legacy. We were not an ummah which used to say, just make dua and you'll be fine, but we recognized depression and anxiety and these mental illnesses as real things. Somewhere along the line, we lost that legacy, and I hope we can gain that back. Okay. That's the only question. All right. Okay, so that is it, inshallah. If anybody needs to reach us, the website is above. You can email me any questions, inshallah. And we ask that, inshallah, that you keep us in your du'as, and may Allah Azza wa Jal also make this organization continuous charity, an organization which flourishes, inshallah. And we'll leave it at that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. And call? Yeah. Okay. End event?